Throughout history, the image of the so-called caveman has been shrouded in misunderstanding, shaped more by fantasy and stereotype than by fact. We picture them stumbling through the shadows, grunting their way through a world they barely comprehend, their lives reduced to a handful of crude gestures and accidental discoveries. Popular culture has painted them as little more than animals with sticks, their stories told in half-light and half-truths, primitive, simple, and hopelessly backward. Yet, when we peel back the layers of myth and look with fresh eyes, we find something startling. The people we call cavemen were anything but dull-witted. In truth, the survival of early humans in the harshest conditions demanded not only strength, but a remarkable creative intelligence, one that still echoes in our own lives today. It's easy to understand why these myths persist. Textbooks and cartoons have long shown us figures clad in animal skins, wielding clubs, and muttering nonsense. Even the very term caveman reduces complex, adaptable people to a single misleading idea. The word itself conjures up images of darkness and isolation, of minds trapped by ignorance, rather than communities bound by memory and innovation. For generations, these caricatures have comforted us with the illusion of progress, telling us that we have come so far, that we are nothing like those who lived before. But the reality is more nuanced and, in many ways, more inspiring. Why do we so stubbornly hold on to these notions? Part of the answer lies in our deep-seated need to draw boundaries between ourselves and the unknown. The further removed a people seem from our own experience, the safer we feel, shielded from the anxieties of our own vulnerability. When we imagine the first humans as blundering through the world, we reassure ourselves that intelligence and culture are our exclusive territory, earned through the slow march of time. But if we allow ourselves to look past the surface, to consider what it really meant to survive in a world of ice and predators, of hunger and darkness, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Our ancestors were not just survivors, but thinkers, problem solvers, and inventors. Their world was a relentless teacher. There were no manuals for building shelter or foraging for food, no guides for making fire or navigating the hidden dangers of the wild. Every step required observation, memory, and the courage to try something new. The ability to notice subtle shifts in the weather, to remember which plants could heal and which could harm, to predict the movement of herds or the approach of storms. All of this demanded a mind keenly tuned to its surroundings. Even in the act of gathering food, what might seem simple to us was a daily act of judgment and calculation. Which roots were edible, which were deadly, how to find water beneath the snow, how to store what was needed for the lean months ahead. The challenge of the cold itself forced ingenuity. Each winter was a test of adaptation, requiring solutions to problems that would baffle even modern minds. The invention of layered clothing, stitched from the hides of animals, was not merely a happy accident, but the result of close observation and experimentation. An understanding of materials, a knowledge of the body's needs, a drive to make things better. The first fires were coaxed into life not just by luck, but by determination, by countless failures, and the willingness to learn from every spark and ember. These achievements were not just personal, they were shared, passed down through generations, refined and improved with each telling. Communication, too, was far richer than the simple grunts and shouts so often depicted in fiction. The first humans spoke with gestures and glances, with songs and stories, with art scratched onto stone walls and the rhythms of daily life. Every mark and symbol carried meaning, a thread connecting past to future, individual to group. To lead, to teach, to comfort, or to warn, all required empathy and understanding, the very building blocks of community. Laughter, ritual, the sharing of grief and hope, these were as much a part of their world as any tool or weapon. We misjudge them not because they lacked intelligence, but because it is easy to mistake difference for deficiency. Their problems were not our problems, and their solutions, honed by necessity, do not always look familiar. But intelligence is not measured by gadgets or written language alone. It is measured by adaptability, by the courage to face the unknown, by the ingenuity to turn hardship into opportunity. These are the qualities that allowed early humans not only to endure, but to thrive. Beneath every stereotype lies the shadow of truth, that the people we once imagined as simple were, in fact, complex and creative, wrestling with mysteries we can barely imagine. They learned to read the world like a living book, to draw meaning from the smallest detail, to cooperate, to innovate, and to dream of something beyond mere survival. The roots of every modern achievement, art, science, society, stretch back to their struggles and triumphs. Today, as we marvel at our own progress, we carry within us the legacy of their intelligence. Our fear of the unknown, our need for warmth and meaning, our instinct to gather together in the face of adversity. All these are ancient gifts, handed down through generations. The next time we imagine cavemen as bumbling or blind, we would do well to remember, without their insight, their courage, and their restless minds, there would be no story of humanity at all. Their greatest invention was not the tool in their hand, but the spirit within, a spirit that still lives in each of us, quietly urging us to adapt, to question, and to create. Long before written language or formal schools, before the first spoken myths were passed from one generation to the next, nature herself was the earliest and most demanding teacher. The people who walked the edge of ancient forests and wandered wide, open plains entered a world brimming with danger and uncertainty, a place where every day was a test, every moment a lesson in the art of noticing, remembering, and adapting. Survival in such a world was never accidental. From the first waking breath, early humans were compelled to observe the world around them with a keen, hungry curiosity. They learned to listen for subtle shifts in the wind, to track the movement of clouds and the whisper of leaves before a storm. When birds suddenly lifted into the air as one, it was a signal, a warning that a predator or change was near. If animals vanished from a stream or a hillside grew silent, it could mean a great beast was prowling close or that something in the environment had shifted. The rhythm of the natural world became a language to decipher, each clue a potential answer to the question of how to survive another day. Animals, in particular, offered some of the clearest and most useful lessons. Early humans watched the patient stalking of wolves and learned the power of the group, how many could do what one alone could not. They saw how foxes circled downwind of their prey and copied their careful approach, understanding the need for stealth and strategy. When crows cracked nuts on rocks or used sticks to pry out insects, people took note and began to experiment themselves, testing stones against shells, inventing their own tools, discovering which methods brought reward. The patient wisdom of nature's creatures became a template, a guide for countless experiments in their own hands. Patterns emerged, patiently catalogued by memory. Where the sun rose and set, how the light moved across the land, when berries grew plump or rivers ran deep. These were more than background details. They became the foundation for every crucial decision: when to hunt, where to gather, when to move camp, when to stay and wait out the elements. Over time, what began as random trial and error transformed into a kind of science, an accumulating storehouse of experience, tested by hardship and shared through stories and gestures around the fire. The ability to see patterns where others saw chaos marked the earliest glimmers of true ingenuity. A certain bird's call might predict rain. A cluster of mushrooms growing only near particular trees could signal hidden water. The changing shape of animal tracks in snow told not just of movement, but of intent, of fear, of the turning of the season. Early people learned to imitate the calls of animals to lure them close, or to lay traps in places where deer left regular paths. Even their shelters took inspiration from the world around them. Burrows and nests, dens and overhangs, copied, improved, adapted for their own needs. Each discovery was a quiet revolution, a small victory over the unknown. To understand when to dig for roots or how to find a cache of nuts hidden by a squirrel was to transform the world from an enemy into a partner. The earliest humans became students of every whisper, every footprint, every new blossom breaking through frost. They learned not only to survive, but to thrive, turning nature's challenges into opportunities, and every animal, every wind, every stone into a teacher. The chaos of the world was never truly tamed, but with each new insight, humans shaped meaning from uncertainty. The knowledge gained in those ancient days was shared in the only ways possible, through demonstration, through repeated acts, through stories woven into the fabric of daily life. In this way, the art of survival became the first great human tradition, one that relied not on brute force or luck, but on a restless, searching mind, and the humility to learn from the wildness all around. It was this early wisdom, this partnership with nature, that seeded every future advance. The instinct to watch, to learn, and to try again remains with us, a quiet inheritance from those who stood at the edge of the unknown and let the world teach them how to endure. Their curiosity became our legacy, proof that intelligence is born not only from thinking, but from noticing, from wondering, and from the courage to make sense of the chaos that surrounds us all. The story of humanity's first tools is often reduced to an image so simple it borders on parody. A hairy figure clumsily wielding a heavy club, smashing at whatever stands in the way. But this cliché conceals the quiet marvel at the heart of early human ingenuity. To craft a tool was not to mindlessly swing a stick or grab a stone at random. It was to study, to experiment, and to imagine new ways of interacting with the world. A slow evolution born of patience, creativity, and real understanding. At first, the world offered only what nature had left scattered at their feet: stones of every shape, fallen branches, bones, and shells. Early people saw not just objects, but possibilities. They observed how a sharp-edged stone could split a reed, how a curved branch fit neatly into the palm, how the jawbone of an animal could scrape clean a hide or dig into tough soil. Over time, these chance discoveries became the seeds of invention. Every new idea was tested, sometimes in solitude, often in the watchful company of others, and always with an eye for what worked, what broke, and what could be made better. Creating a tool required more than brute force. It demanded the ability to see potential, to imagine transformation. Stones were not just picked up, they were chosen for weight, balance, texture. The flaking of flint was a careful process, learned through endless repetition. The angle and strength of each strike had to be just right, or the stone would shatter. The first successful blade was a prize of patience, as valuable as any meal. Handles were not simply tied on, but carefully fitted, lashed with sinew or plant fiber, tested for strength and comfort in the hand. The creation of composite tools, such as spears tipped with carefully shaped stone or axes made from wood and bone, was nothing short of early engineering. It required the ability to bind materials that did not naturally belong together, to test different bindings, to discover which resins or saps could act as glues. Early humans experimented with heat and water, with tension and leverage, watching the results and remembering every lesson. Sometimes failure led to injury or loss, but the group learned and adapted, sharing their findings and building on each other's successes. No one worked in isolation. The making of tools became a communal process, passed down from elders to children, demonstrated again and again by firelight or beneath the shelter of overhanging rocks. Each generation added its own refinements, an improved grip, a sharper edge, a lighter shaft. These small revolutions, born of careful observation, slowly changed everything. Hunting became more effective, shelters more secure, food easier to prepare. The world opened up, not because of brute strength, but because of the quiet triumph of minds at work. To call the first tools just sticks and stones is to overlook the countless hours spent experimenting, the failures endured, and the patience required. These early inventions were the product of trial and error, but also of vision, an ability to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. The first tools were more than objects. They were expressions of intelligence, the outward signs of the inner life of a people learning, dreaming, and building a future from the raw material of the earth. In every smooth stone blade, every polished axe or carefully bound spear, we find the proof of a patient, searching mind. The legacy of those first inventors is with us still, not in the objects they left behind, but in the spirit of innovation and persistence that made them possible. Their tools were the first answer to the world's challenge, and every one was a step out of darkness toward mastery, meaning, and a future shaped by human hands. No story of human progress is complete with the quiet, persistent thread of trial and error. The cycle of bold attempts, stumbles, and slow discovery that propelled our ancestors forward. Early humans stood at the edge of the unknown, guided not by certainty, but by curiosity and necessity. They took risks because they had to, and they learned time and again that every mistake carried the seed of understanding. Nothing in their world was guaranteed. Even the simplest act, striking two stones together to spark a fire, shaping a piece of flint, choosing which berries to eat, was a step into uncertainty. The first time someone tried to catch fish by hand or dig roots from frozen ground, the result was often frustration. Meat spoiled if left too close to the fire. Shelters collapsed under snow. Spears snapped at the worst possible moment. Yet failure was never the end. Each mishap was a lesson, a clue about what might work better next time. Children watched their elders experiment, imitating their movements and learning not just from successes, but from all the little mishaps along the way. Curiosity became a family trait. When an arrow missed its target, its maker studied the feather's angle or the shape of the tip, tweaking, adjusting, starting again. When a new plant caused illness, its look and scent were remembered and taught to others as a warning, while edible roots and safe leaves became precious knowledge to be shared around the fire. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to risk failure for the sake of a breakthrough. Some of the most important discoveries came by accident. A sharp stone splintering off when two rocks collided, a fire kindled by a stray spark, a new adhesive found in tree resin when sap was smeared on a broken handle. Each small victory was hard won, often built on countless setbacks. The group learned to value patience, persistence, and the kind of memory that turned one person's mistake into everyone's advancement. The willingness to try again became a silent code. Sometimes failure carried a price, a wasted day, an injury, or a lost meal. But those who gave up too quickly rarely made new discoveries. Those who persevered, who returned to the problem with fresh eyes and steadier hands, gave their group the tools and ideas that made survival possible. In this way, resilience was born not from perfection, but from the acceptance that each misstep was a stepping stone toward mastery. Through all these trials, knowledge grew layer by layer. Elders became the living memory of the group, storytellers who spun cautionary tales from their own experiments, warnings and encouragements that shaped the choices of the next generation. Every mistake was honored as a necessary part of learning, not as shame, but as opportunity. The world itself, with its endless unpredictability, became a laboratory for minds eager to adapt, and every lesson earned was shared, remembered, and built upon. In the dance of trial and error, our ancestors learned not just to survive, but to thrive. Each failure, endured with humility and hope, became the bedrock of future triumphs. This spirit of risk, resilience, and relentless curiosity remains at the heart of every human endeavor, a living legacy from those who first dared to make the world a little more knowable, one experiment at a time. The survival of a group depended on the transfer of knowledge as much as on fire or food. If a mother learned to soothe a fever with the bark of a certain tree, if a hunter found a new way to trap a rabbit, if a child learned to avoid a poisonous berry by its color or smell, these were lessons too important to risk losing. And so the community developed ways to keep such memories alive, embedding wisdom in the rhythms of daily life, the repetition of rituals, and the power of storytelling. Knowledge became a thread woven into every action, a living legacy passed from one heart to another. At the heart of this transfer was the oral tradition. Before any alphabet or scroll, people relied on voice and ear, on the gift of recall, and on the shared rituals of the campfire or the gathering circle. Elders, living repositories of trial and error, memory and myth, became the guides and guardians of this knowledge. Their stories were more than entertainment. Each tale was a carefully coded lesson, a map through the wilderness of life. With each retelling, details were sharpened, errors weeded out, patterns reinforced. A caution about a bitter root would be woven into a song. The directions to a hidden spring would be hidden in a riddle or a chant. Children absorbed these lessons as easily as breath, learning not by rote, but by listening and repeating, by doing and watching. These spoken encyclopedias grew with each generation. Every time someone discovered a new cure or an unmarked danger, the information was brought back to the group, demonstrated, described, and, if it proved useful, added to the growing library of tribal memory. The process was dynamic, constantly evolving, shaped by the group's collective experience. Mistakes were not hidden but discussed. Their lessons burned into memory so they would not be repeated. It was a system both robust and flexible, able to adapt to changing landscapes and new challenges, to the rise and fall of the seasons and the unpredictable moods of nature. Memory was reinforced in 100 creative ways. Songs set important lessons to rhythm, making them easy to remember on long journeys or during repetitive work. Dances told stories with the body, mapping the steps of a successful hunt or the sequence of a healing ritual. Tools themselves could be teaching aids. A blade given to a young hunter came with a story of how it was made, when it failed, and how it was finally perfected. Even scars and healed wounds became lessons, their tales recounted as warnings and proof of survival. This shared knowledge was not only practical but deeply communal. Everyone contributed, everyone learned, everyone had a stake in remembering. A group's very identity was shaped by the wisdom it carried, where it had come from, what it had overcome, what it knew that others did not. Identity, safety, and even pride were tied to the ability to recall and pass on information. The most respected members of the tribe were often not the strongest or fastest, but those whose memories stretched farthest, who could recall the time of great hunger or the place where the sun set behind the twin rocks. The role of teacher and learner was fluid, and even the youngest were expected to listen, ask, and eventually take their turn as keepers of the group's knowledge. The oral encyclopedia reached into every aspect of life. Medicine was passed on in the details of how to prepare a poultice, the signs to watch for before sickness took hold, the sequence of steps in a healing ritual. Knowledge of animals, their tracks, calls, habits, and hiding places became a catalog recited on cold mornings or whispered on the trail. The stories of past disasters, near misses, and great successes were recounted not just for drama, but as maps showing how to avoid old mistakes and seek out new opportunities. Even relationships, who was related to who had broken a taboo, who had mended a rift, became part of this living archive, ensuring the group could function smoothly and avoid repeating the social errors of the past. Over time, this culture of memory shaped not only survival, but imagination and identity. The desire to remember, to teach, and to be remembered became part of what it meant to be human. The group's history was carried not in monuments, but in the hearts and voices of those who gathered each night. The impulse to create art, to mark stone with symbols, to paint stories on the walls of caves was an extension of this urge, a way to fix memory in place, to send a message to those yet unborn. Every mark, every song, every story was a thread in the great tapestry of collective memory. The oral tradition, fragile as it might seem, proved astonishingly resilient. In a world without writing, it preserved complex knowledge for centuries, sometimes even millennia. The living encyclopedia of the tribe was always more than the sum of its parts. It was a collective mind, a social memory that could adapt, endure, and thrive in the face of the unknown. In this, early humans discovered one of their greatest strengths, not just the ability to survive, but to remember, to teach, and to create a future in which every lesson mattered and no knowledge was truly lost. It might seem paradoxical that in a world ruled by hunger, cold, and constant danger, the first people found time and reason to create images on stone walls, to carve shapes from bone, to invent rituals of color and pattern. Yet, from the harshness of their daily existence, something profound was born: the awakening of imagination, the urge to make marks that reached beyond the moment, the creation of art that became as essential to survival as any weapon or fire. At first glance, a cave painting or a necklace of beads may appear a luxury, a fleeting distraction from the struggle for life. But for early humans, art was never just an ornament. It was a tool, one of the most powerful ever made. When a hand pressed ochre to stone, or a sharp flint scratched out the curve of a mammoth or the leap of a deer, it was not merely recording what was seen. It was an act of memory and hope, a way of capturing wisdom and passing it on, a quiet defiance against forgetting. Imagination offered a new kind of power. Where the spoken word could vanish with the wind, a symbol or painting endured. A mark on the wall became a reminder of a dangerous hunt, a warning about a hidden cave, a map to water, or a memory of a great gathering. Over time, the cave itself became a living record, its walls layered with story, each image a chapter in the long survival of the group. For those who returned in later seasons, or for children not yet born, these marks carried instructions and inspiration, proof that others had faced hardship and overcome. But the force of imagination reached even deeper. Art was a form of connection, a way for people to share dreams, fears, and visions that words alone could not carry. A painted animal might be a memory, but it could also be a hope for future abundance, a kind of prayer or ritual meant to influence the world beyond immediate reach. The rhythm of painting or carving could bring comfort, focusing the mind, offering a sense of control in an unpredictable landscape. Even the act of gathering for a shared creation, mixing pigments, telling stories, watching the elders work, became a ritual that forged community, soothed grief, and turned fear into shared strength. Imagination itself became a survival strategy. In moments of despair, it allowed people to envision solutions, a new way to build a shelter, a different method for trapping fish, a tool reshaped in the mind before it was ever shaped by hand. Stories told by the fire of monsters, heroes, ancestors offered not only entertainment, but models for courage and ingenuity. They prepared the young to expect the unexpected, to believe that change was possible, that hardship could be met with cleverness and unity. Symbols began to hold power. A spiral etched on a rock, the pattern of a handprint, the figure of a shaman in animal skins. These became signposts in the wilderness, reminders that the world was not only chaos, but also meaning. They turned the random into the memorable, the confusing into the understandable. Over time, these marks grew into language, myth, and culture, the foundations upon which all later civilization would rest. Art was never a frivolous thing. For those first people, it was both shield and torch. A shield against the loss of memory, against the isolation of fear, against the emptiness of days that could otherwise blur together. A torch that lit the way through darkness, that illuminated paths of connection, hope, and possibility. Even as bodies suffered, imagination made endurance meaningful. The need to create, tell, to dream became as central to survival as the ability to hunt or build. What survives on the walls of caves is not only the image of a bison or a hunter, but the unbroken thread of human spirit. A reminder that, from the very beginning, survival was as much about what we could imagine as about what we could see and touch. In every painted line and carved figure lies the first flicker of the modern mind, the realization that through imagination we could change not only our world, but ourselves. Long before language was fixed in grammar or captured in symbols, communication was already pulsing through the ancient world, alive in every gesture, every glance, every tone of voice. Early humans moved through a landscape where survival often depended less on muscle and more on the ability to share warnings, rally the group, soothe a frightened child, or coordinate a hunt with silent precision. In these moments, the roots of language began to grow, not as a sudden invention, but as a living, evolving web of gestures, sounds, and emotion. The first words may have been little more than shared looks or instinctive cries, but even these had weight. A sharp shout or a drawn-out hum could summon attention, while a wave of the hand or the lift of an eyebrow might signal danger or invitation. The group learned to read urgency in posture, reassurance in touch, and intent in the rhythm of breathing. Children picked up meaning as much by watching as by listening. imitating the adult's signals as naturally as they learned to walk. In this way, the earliest forms of communication were not limited to sound alone. They were a full-body expression, a choreography of meaning that shaped every moment of the day. Necessity was the greatest teacher. As groups grew larger and the challenges of hunting, gathering, and sharing increased, so did the need for clearer and more flexible ways to exchange information. A pointing finger could show where danger lurked or where berries ripened. The shape of a mouth, the narrowing of the eyes, the tilt of a head. Each gesture added context, coloring words with warning, humor, or encouragement. Emotional tone became a kind of music, letting a single word serve as a joke, a question, or a comfort, depending on how it was delivered. Over time, these signals grew more complex. Groups developed their own shared repertoires, a certain whistle to gather the clan, a patterned clap to celebrate, a soft hum to lull a restless child. Mimicry of animal sounds could warn of a nearby predator, while playful nonsense noises became a way to make children laugh and strengthen bonds. In the safety of the group, new words and signals were tested, repeated, and remembered. What began as instinct became tradition, woven into the identity of each community. Crucially, language became the bridge between what was felt and what was known. It allowed people not only to shout a warning, but to share a story of where to find water, how to make a tool, or why a certain ritual mattered. The ability to share the past and imagine the future gave language its greatest power, motivation. Through spoken encouragement, the group could urge a tired hunter to try again, reassure the anxious, or build collective excitement before a celebration. Humor, too, found its place. A well-timed gesture or playful word could dissolve tension, forge trust, and bring laughter even in hard times. Language was not only a tool of necessity, but a spark of connection. It turned individuals into a true community, able to coordinate action, share ideas, and transmit culture. With every word, gesture, and tone, the boundaries of understanding expanded, drawing people closer, letting them face the uncertainties of the world not as scattered voices, but as a choir, improvising, harmonizing, finding meaning together. And so speech did not replace gesture, but grew from it, an ever-changing blend of sound, movement, and feeling. The story of language is not just the story of words, but of every way humans learned to reach each other. The comfort of a hand on the shoulder, the burst of shared laughter, the silent signal that warned of danger or invited play. In this living conversation, the first people laid the groundwork for every myth, every joke, every declaration of love or courage that would follow. The birth of language was not a single leap, but 1,000 daily acts of reaching out, a legacy that still shapes every word we speak and every feeling we hope to share. If you trace your finger along the timelines painted in ancient caves or follow the echoes of laughter and shouts through a prehistoric valley, you'll find something extraordinary taking shape: the birth of true teamwork. Unlike the instinct-driven flocks and packs of the wild, early humans learned, often through necessity, to join forces not just for survival's sake, but to create, to protect, to invent, and to overcome challenges that no single person, no matter how strong or clever, could face alone. The earliest roots of teamwork sprouted from shared hardship. Imagine the frozen edge of winter, the tall grasses of the hunt, or the shadowy mouth of a cave. In these places, danger waited, sometimes in the form of a stalking beast, other times as hunger or an approaching storm. One human alone, pitted against the teeth and cold of nature, might have hope for a few days, but in the long struggle for life, it was the group, moving as one, adapting together, pooling ideas and effort that changed the odds. These were not mindless swarms or instinctive herds. Teamwork among people was woven from something deeper: trust, empathy, and the hard-earned wisdom that each person brought something different to the fire. The old and the young, the swift and the careful, the bold and the cautious, all had a part to play. A well-organized hunt was a dance of strategy and patience. Some flushed animals from hiding, others waited in ambush, while another group tracked from a distance or guarded the camp. Success depended on timing and coordination, on reading each other's signals and working in silent harmony, sometimes without a single word. Unlike animal packs, human dream teams were built on learning and adaptation. Skills were taught and shared, strengths noticed and celebrated. A child who learned to watch the sky for birds became the best scout. Someone who crafted better snares became the teacher of traps. The group evolved with every new challenge, forming and reforming into the shapes needed by the moment. A flexible, creative approach that turned even disaster into an opportunity for learning. When something failed, blame faded quickly. The important thing was to try again, to listen, and to trust the group's collective intelligence. In these groups, bonds formed that ran deeper than blood. The joy of a shared meal after a long hunt, the relief of seeing a missing friend return, the pride in building a new shelter together. All of these moments reinforced the truth that together, people were stronger, smarter, and safer. The sharing of tools, of stories, of songs, and of comfort after a loss became the invisible glue holding the community together, even when times were hardest. But teamwork among humans had another, subtler difference from animal cooperation: the power to imagine together. Not only could people work side by side in the present, but they could dream about the future, plan for what was coming, and inspire each other with visions of what might be possible. Before the hunt, an elder might sketch lines in the dirt, imagining the path of the herd. Before building a shelter, the group would discuss how to shape the entrance to catch the morning sun. Humor lightened heavy days. Songs gave rhythm to work, and rituals brought everyone into step before great challenges. These acts of collective imagination turned survival into something richer, a journey with meaning, hope, and the spark of shared ambition. Over time, these early teams became the foundation for everything that followed. The habit of cooperation, the joy of success earned together, the lessons learned from each other's strengths and mistakes. These were passed down not as rules, but as stories and rituals, songs and gestures. Every new generation built on what the last had learned, weaving the wisdom of many into something no single person could ever achieve alone. The secret power of the human collective was not just in numbers, but in connection, a willingness to listen, to teach, to care, and to dream together. Where animals relied on instinct, people built community from curiosity and compassion, creating not just groups, but families, tribes, and eventually societies. In this, teamwork became the hidden engine of humanity's rise, the spark that set us apart, and the gift that still fuels every great thing we accomplish together. Among the oldest stories whispered around ancient fires are not only tales of mighty hunters or daring escapes from wild beasts, but the subtler, more complex accounts of first encounters, moments when people met other people, strangers whose intentions were as unclear as the shifting wind. In these unpredictable meetings, it became clear that survival was not just a contest of muscle or weaponry, but a delicate game of negotiation, reading, and sometimes outsmarting those across the clearing. The true path through prehistory was often shaped by the cunning and the wise. not simply the strongest arm. It was a world where resources were scarce, seasons harsh, and the margin for error dangerously thin. When two groups crossed paths, perhaps drawn by the same herd of animals, or seeking shelter in the same stretch of forest, tension could flare with the smallest misunderstanding. At first, gestures of caution, spears held low but ready, eyes fixed on the strangers, silent signals exchanged behind cupped hands. The first diplomats were not appointed by vote or birthright, but emerged in these tense moments. Those who could step forward with calm, who sensed when to offer a token of peace, a shared morsel of food, or a simple tool as a sign of goodwill. Negotiation was a skill born of observation and empathy. Those who succeeded learned to read posture and tone, to watch for a flash of hostility or the softening of suspicion. They knew when to speak, when to fall silent, when to back away, and when to press for more. Sometimes alliances were built on shared threats, the promise of protection from predators, the chance to hunt larger game together, or the agreement to trade useful items. A shiny shell or a rare stone could open doors, just as a clever story could diffuse anger or win trust. Yet peace was never guaranteed. Where friendship and exchange flourished, so too did rivalry and betrayal. There were times when groups traded gifts in the morning and clashed by nightfall. Times when a handshake disguised a plan to test the other's strength or probe for weaknesses. Trickery was as old as generosity, and the best survivors were those who could balance both. To feign weakness, to flatter a rival, to pretend agreement while preparing a secret escape, these tactics required wit, memory, and nerve. The earliest humans learned, sometimes painfully, that the world of relationships was as wild and unpredictable as the forests themselves. Still, the smartest did not thrive alone. Even cunning required community, a network of trust and shared strategy. Within the tribe, the diplomat became a voice of reason, persuading the hot-headed to hold back, counseling patience when anger boiled over, or spinning tales that reframed failure as a lesson, not a disaster. When conflict was unavoidable, it was often the words exchanged before the clash and the deals struck afterward that determined who walked away stronger. The art of compromise, of sharing scarce resources, or agreeing to take turns at the best hunting grounds, was the quiet engine behind many long winters of peace. These early negotiations planted the seeds for the first rules of trade, alliance, and even justice. Over time, the reputation of a group depended as much on its fairness and cleverness as on its strength in battle. Groups who gained a name for keeping their word, for offering help in times of famine, or for being shrewd but honorable, attracted allies, marriages, and the steady trickle of new knowledge. The slyest hunters, the wiliest negotiators, and the boldest peacemakers shaped the future of their tribes, creating networks that stretched far beyond the campfire's glow. In this, the lesson of ancient diplomacy endures. It is not always the strongest who survive, but those who can read a rival's heart, share when needed, outwit when threatened, and build bridges even in the shadow of conflict. The balance between hostility and help, between rivalry and partnership, became the art that made civilization possible. An art as old as humanity itself, still unfolding in every deal, every treaty, every fragile handshake that echoes across the ages. In the shadowy corridors of ancient caves and on the open plains where survival was a daily struggle, history often highlights the strong-armed hunter, the heroic figure who brought down the great beast. But the true engine of progress, the quiet genius behind many of humanity's earliest breakthroughs, pulsed most strongly among those whom later stories and even modern minds too often overlooked: the women, the children, and the elders. For every dramatic hunt or triumphant return, there were countless hours of gathering, observing, preparing, and tending that went unseen. Women, often anchored near the heart of the shelter, became the great experimenters and innovators in the art of daily survival. It was their careful attention that turned bitter roots into edible meals, that identified which berries healed and which harmed, that invented the first containers, nets, or weaving patterns. Their hands, calloused from labor, transformed the wild world's bounty into food, clothing, tools, and medicine. Through patient trial and error, women often discovered new ways to preserve food or treat wounds, turning accidental finds into traditions that would shape the future of the group. Children, with their insatiable curiosity and fearless play, became nature's first scientists. Too small to hunt or fight, they had the gift of time and the freedom to explore, poke, prod, and mimic. Their games revealed patterns adults missed. Their laughter and questions sparked new insights. It was often a child who noticed a strange insect, a hidden spring, or the behavior of animals before anyone else. Sometimes their accidental discoveries, such as the taste of a new fruit or a clever way to trap a lizard, became the origin of knowledge that would ripple through generations. The elders, meanwhile, served as the living memory and wisdom of the tribe. Long past their days of swift running or strong arms, they possessed the most valuable resource of all: experience. They remembered storms from decades past, migrations of animals, or years of plenty and hunger. Their stories, told by firelight, encoded the warnings and lessons earned at great cost. Elders were often the ones to notice when history was repeating itself, to suggest patience when the group was eager, or to recall an ancient remedy when sickness threatened. They were the keepers of ritual, the teachers of songs and dances that embedded practical knowledge in culture. Crucially, survival was rarely the result of one lone genius. It was a collaborative achievement, with women, children, and elders supplying the questions, the experiments, and the memory that allowed the tribe to grow. While the hunt was dangerous and celebrated, the preparation of the hunt, the storage of its spoils, the care for the wounded, and the telling of the hunt's story afterward all depended on the less visible members of the community. Their daily actions, sharpening tools, mending furs, calming the frightened, tending the sick, were as essential as any thrown spear. Some of the most important innovations in human history, fire tending, food preservation, clothing, and even the first shelters, were likely refined, if not invented, by those whom tradition relegates to the background. They had time to experiment, to pass on careful observations, and to develop new techniques not in the chaos of the hunt, but in the quieter moments of daily life. Far from being weak or secondary, women, children, and elders were the glue that held the community together and the spark that set off waves of innovation. They saw the world with fresh eyes or wise hearts, and they were driven by needs and motivations, care, curiosity, memory, that shaped the very soul of the tribe. The first artists, healers, teachers, and inventors likely rose from these ranks, their quiet revolutions building the foundation for all that followed. When we look back, it is clear that progress was never just the story of brawn or bravery. The most important discoveries, the secrets that kept the fire burning, that healed wounds, that turned the harsh wild into home, were so often made by those whom the world had not yet learned to celebrate. Their genius is our inheritance, the subtle, persistent force that carried humanity forward, shaping our story not through noise or spectacle, but through the relentless collective work of minds both old and young, strong and gentle, daring and wise. In a world without clocks or calendars, where the only certainty was change itself, early humans looked to the sky and the land for patterns, a silent code that, once cracked, transformed not just how they survived, but how they understood themselves and their place in the universe. The very idea of time as something to be measured and anticipated was one of humanity's most subtle yet profound inventions, a leap of imagination that began not with technology, but with patient observation and a yearning to make sense of the chaos around them. At first, time revealed itself in the obvious cycles of day and night. The rise and fall of the sun, the waxing and waning of light became the earliest markers. Children learned to watch for the way shadows stretched across the ground, for the chill that signaled evening, and for the changing songs of birds at dawn. Daily routines, hunting, gathering, storytelling, resting, quickly settled into these natural rhythms, aligning life with the turning of the earth. But for a people whose survival often hung on the thinnest thread, such awareness soon deepened. Hunters learned that animals moved in predictable patterns, deer appearing near water at dusk, birds migrating at certain times, fish swarming after the full moon. Women and elders, tending to plants and children, noticed how roots fattened before rain, how berries ripened with the lengthening sun, how the first frost always arrived when a certain star grew bright in the early evening. What began as scattered observations slowly became a kind of collective memory, an unwritten record of when to act, when to wait, and when to prepare for what was coming. The sky itself became the tribe's first clock. The moon's phases, its changing face of silver and shadow, were tracked and counted, marking the passing of months and the best moments for travel, ritual, or rest. Some groups piled stones or carved notches into bones to keep track of these cycles, the earliest calendars emerging from the patient work of counting and remembering. Over generations, stories attached themselves to certain stars or constellations, anchoring memory in the night sky and weaving cosmology into the fabric of daily life. When the hunter rises in the east, it is time to move to the valley. When the 7 stars gather overhead, the fish return to the river. The heavens were a map and a memory, teaching the young how to anticipate the invisible dance of the seasons. Understanding time became a strategy for survival. The tribe that could predict the first snow or the last frost had an advantage in storing food, planning hunts, or moving camp. The group that noticed the sun's angle on a favorite stone could sense the shift from autumn to winter, from hunger to hope. Rites and rituals, solstice fires, moonlit dances, the telling of certain stories only at certain times helped fix these patterns in memory, turning astronomical observation into communal culture. Calendars were born not only from curiosity, but from the need to endure, to know when to plant and when to harvest, when to settle and when to wander, when to celebrate and when to mourn. This growing awareness transformed the inner world as well. People began to think in terms of past and future, to imagine what might be or recall what had been, to tell their children not just about today, but about tomorrow. The invention of time gave rise to hope, to anxiety, to planning and dreaming. It allowed for the keeping of promises. When the moon is new again, we will return. After 5 snows, the animals will come back. Memory and anticipation became the twin pillars of culture, shaping how the group saw itself and its story within the wider flow of the world. The first calendars were not circles of stone or written charts, but the living, breathing minds of those who watched, remembered, and taught. In every ritual and every song, the rhythm of time echoed, a silent partner to every hunt, every fire, every shared meal. By learning to mark the passage of days and seasons, early humans gained a measure of control over an unpredictable world. They became not just survivors, but students of the universe, shaping their destiny one sunrise, one star, one remembered pattern at a time. Long before the first apothecary or the shimmer of glass vials, healing was an art woven into the daily fabric of survival, a craft born of necessity, careful observation, and relentless experimentation. In the shadow of winter, when injury or illness threatened to tip the scales against life itself, early humans looked to the living world for answers. Their medicine chest was the wild itself: roots and leaves, bark and berries, spring water and clay. From these humble beginnings came the foundation of remedies and knowledge that even now modern science sometimes rediscovers with awe. The journey to healing began with the simplest act: noticing. Women and elders, tending children or gathering food, observed how animals responded to sickness. Wolves licking wounds with certain grasses, deer chewing bitter leaves when feverish, birds dusting their feathers in particular earth. Curious minds paid attention when one plant stung the tongue but soothed a cut, when the smoke from burning wood cleared a stuffy nose, or eased the pain of a swollen joint. Every experiment was a risk and a lesson. Not every attempt brought relief, and some brought harm, but over generations the knowledge accumulated like a hidden treasure. The making of medicine became a blend of ritual and science. Leaves were boiled into teas, roots mashed to paste, wild honey smeared on wounds, and mosses used as bandages. Some tribes discovered that the bark of certain trees could lower a fever, or that crushed seeds mixed with animal fat sped the healing of scrapes. Each success became a story retold by firelight. This plant saved the child from the burning illness, or mix this powder with water when the belly aches. Remedies were remembered through songs, gestures, and the shared experience of the tribe. Children learned to identify plants as much for their healing power as for their taste, absorbing the lessons of survival with every step through the wild. Early medicine was about more than plants. Bone setting, wound cleaning, and splinting were honed by trial, sometimes with knowledge passed along from those who watched animals heal themselves. A broken arm was wrapped with bark and tied with sinew. A cut was rinsed with cold stream water, then packed with clay or cobwebs to stop the bleeding. Fevered patients were cooled with wet leaves. Those weakened by winter's hunger were nourished with broths simmered from every available bone and root. Sickness and healing became communal concerns. When someone fell ill, the whole group cared for them, drawing on collective wisdom and shared hope. The rituals around healing also mattered. Sometimes the act of care itself, touch, song, or the offering of a talisman helped to calm fear, slow a racing heart, or bring peace to the suffering. The boundary between medicine and magic was often thin. What we now see as the placebo effect was, for early people, a mysterious but essential part of the cure. Belief in healing, trust in the healer, and the comfort of community gave strength even when remedies were few. Many of these ancient discoveries left a legacy that survives in today's science. The willow bark, once chewed to ease pain, contains the same chemical at the heart of aspirin. The use of honey, clay, and certain resins is echoed in modern wound care. Herbal teas brewed against colds, salves made from roots, and infusions to soothe the spirit are still part of folk medicine worldwide. Scientists continue to look to the traditions of indigenous peoples for new antibiotics, anti-inflammatories, and cures for chronic ailments, knowing that each ancient recipe holds a story of trial, hope, and resilience. The secret of ancient medicine was never just in the plant or the stone, but in the mind that watched, wondered, and remembered. It was in the courage to experiment, the humility to learn from failure, and the generosity to share what worked with others. The earliest healers, often women, elders, or those drawn by curiosity, became the first scientists, their recipes a living link between humanity and the healing power of the earth. In every remedy born from those wild, uncertain days, we find not only the roots of medicine, but the spirit of human ingenuity, the belief that even when the world was cold and unforgiving, there was always hope for healing, always another lesson to be learned, always a reason to keep searching for relief in the vast pharmacy of nature. The image of ancient peoples cowering at random in whatever cave or hollow they stumbled upon is a persistent myth, but the real story of humanity's first shelters is one of thoughtful adaptation, careful planning, and quiet genius. The world outside was seldom kind. Wind slicing through valleys, snow piling at cave mouths, rains turning soil to ice or mud. A place to sleep was never just a matter of luck or instinct. It was the result of decisions made with survival, comfort, and community in mind. From the very beginning, finding and shaping shelter was an act of observation and foresight. Not all caves were created equal. Some faced prevailing winds. Others flooded after storms. Some were already home to predators. Early humans learned to read the land the way later generations would read blueprints. Which direction did the mouth face? Was the roof stable? Would water pool inside? Did sunlight reach the floor at dawn? And could smoke escape without choking the inhabitants? These questions shaped the very first acts of architecture. If the land offered no natural refuge, people got to work, inventing solutions to fit their needs. In forests and plains, they lashed branches together, weaving reeds and grasses to make walls, learning to insulate with moss and hides. Rocks were stacked with purpose, not just for strength, but to deflect wind and to create chambers for sleeping, working, and storage. Some groups discovered that building partially underground or piling snow in dense mounds offered warmth and protection that above-ground huts could not. Each choice was the result of generations watching how the world behaved and responding with ingenuity. The interior of these shelters was rarely left to chance. Family groups created zones, places to cook and eat, places to sleep, corners for tools, storage, and even rituals. The fire, always central, was carefully placed to warm the largest area without filling the shelter with smoke. Stones or logs formed seating, and dried grasses softened sleeping spots. In larger caves or constructed houses, groups sometimes used woven mats or animal skins to create partitions, giving privacy and order to communal life. Protection from animals and rivals was a constant concern. Entrances were hidden behind thickets, blocked at night with heavy stones or branches. Some shelters were designed with lookout points or secondary exits for escape. The most successful layouts made use of natural features, boulders, slopes, water sources, turning every advantage in the landscape into a safeguard for the group. Building was always a communal task, and knowledge was passed down by demonstration and repetition. Children watched as elders shaped the frame of a roof, learned which wood bent and which snapped, practiced tying knots and weaving reeds. Every improvement, from the angle of a lean-to to the layering of hides, was remembered, discussed, and incorporated into the next design. Sometimes new ideas came from necessity: a harsh winter, an attack by animals, a sudden flood, but soon became tradition, spreading as families traveled and shared what worked. Even the act of decorating a home, hanging a talisman at the entrance, painting a wall with symbols, arranging stones in patterns, was not just for beauty, but for marking territory, celebrating the group's story, and offering a sense of belonging. In these early dwellings, form and function blended seamlessly. Shelters were safe, comfortable, and full of meaning. Over generations, the science of building became part of the tribe's identity. Those who could choose the best spot, design the warmest wall, or solve problems like drainage or ventilation earned special respect. Their skills were passed on in stories, rituals, and hands-on teaching, laying the foundation for the architects and engineers of the future. Today, when we look at the ruins of a stone circle, the soot stains on a cave roof, or the remnants of an ancient wall, we are seeing not the relics of chaos, but the echoes of a calculated science. Every shelter was a blueprint written in survival, memory, and hope, a testimony to the early human mind's relentless search for security and comfort in a wild, unpredictable world. In every structure, there is the invisible presence of generations thinking, planning, and working together. Proof that even in prehistory, architecture was a story of ingenuity, adaptation, and the unending quest for home. There is a unique, haunting courage in the decision to leave behind everything familiar: the shelter that kept out the cold, the spring where water always flowed, the ancient trees whose roots held the stories of 1,000 nights. Yet time and again, our distant ancestors did just that, stepping from the comfort of their hard-won refuges and into the vast, uncertain unknown. The tale of humanity's great migrations is not simply one of wandering or blind hope. It is a saga of deep calculation, collective discipline, and a genius for planning that rivals any feat of civilization. At the heart of every migration was necessity. The reasons were many: the slow retreat of herds across open plains, the dwindling of berries and roots in exhausted soil, the rise of ice and flood, the press of rival groups, or the haunting promise of a better life beyond the horizon. But necessity alone could not force movement. There had to be a willingness to risk, a leap of faith, and the wisdom to know when the old ways would no longer serve. The first spark was often lit by the keen eyes of the elders and the boldness of the young, a recognition, whispered in the shelter or spoken at the fire, that staying meant dwindling and leaving offered a future. The logistics of such a journey were astonishing. Every decision was fraught with danger and required sharp minds as much as strong bodies. The group could not simply set out at random. They had to time their departure with the seasons, choosing a window when the cold would not kill, when rivers were low enough to cross, and when food might be found along the way. Scouts went ahead to search for water sources, safe paths, or signs of enemies and animals. Each member of the group, women, children, elders, hunters, was accounted for, their strengths and vulnerabilities carefully balanced in the plan. Preparation was everything. Food had to be dried and packed, hides and furs stitched into portable bundles, tools checked and sharpened. Children were taught what to watch for, how to follow the sun, to recognize a broken branch or a distant call that meant danger or hope. The old and weak rode or were supported, sometimes in makeshift sleds or carried by the strong, while the fastest ranged ahead as lookouts. The youngest learned to walk in silence, to move as a unit, to obey signals instantly. Each lesson bought by the memory of what happened when discipline failed. The journey itself was a daily test of character and strategy. Leaders watched the weather, read the wind, and made decisions with the welfare of the whole in mind. At night, camps were chosen for their defensibility, warmth, and proximity to water. Fires were built to ward off predators and signal to the scattered, and every member knew the part they must play: gathering wood, tending the ill, or simply offering encouragement in the darkest hours. Teamwork was as vital as any tool. Disagreements had to be settled quickly, spirits kept high, and moments of despair met with stories, songs, and rituals that reminded everyone of why they walked. Mistakes could mean disaster: a lost waterhole, a sudden storm, an encounter with hostile strangers. But the group learned, adapted, and pressed on. The migration was as much a test of intelligence as of endurance. The ability to improvise, to map new terrain in memory, to notice the promise of an edible plant or the warning of unfamiliar tracks. When finally a new land was reached, a valley rich with green, a cave untouched, a river teeming with fish, the triumph was not just in arriving, but in all that had been learned along the way. These journeys rewrote the group's story, brought new knowledge, and forged bonds deeper than blood. The migration itself became a legend, told and retold to the next generation, not just as a tale of bravery, but as a manual for survival: how to weigh risk against hope, how to plan for the unknown, how to turn loss and longing into the promise of renewal. The great migrations shaped not only where people lived, but how they thought and who they became. The art of moving together, of reading the signs of the world and of each other, became the secret strength of humanity, a testament to foresight, cooperation, and the enduring genius of those who dared to seek a better life beyond the edge of the map. In the cold silence of ancient nights, with the fire burning low and the world outside vast and unknowable, people found themselves haunted by questions that no hunt or invention could answer. Why did the sun return after winter? Where did the wind come from? And where did those who disappeared truly go? What forces decided if the hunt succeeded, if the rains came, if sickness struck or faded? These questions lingered in the hush before sleep, echoing in the hearts of those who had seen both wonder and terror in the wild. Thus, the earliest roots of faith took hold, not as a distraction, but as a vital tool for navigating the greatest mysteries of life. For early humans, ritual and belief were not luxuries or afterthoughts, they were woven into survival itself. The world they faced was unpredictable, beautiful, and dangerous, its patterns only partly understood, its power felt in every storm, eclipse, or burst of new life. In this landscape, rituals became a way of asking for help or favor, a dance to bring rain, an offering to ensure safe passage, a chant to calm fear in the dark. These acts were not performed in vain hope, but with the deep intuition that there was something greater at work, a rhythm or presence that could be acknowledged, respected, and perhaps gently influenced. Art and ritual walked hand in hand. A painting of animals on a cave wall was more than a memory of the hunt. It was a prayer, a wish, a silent bargain with the world. Stones arranged in circles, fires lit in patterns, faces marked with ash or ochre. Each gesture transformed the ordinary into the sacred, drawing invisible lines between the mundane and the magical. Through these acts, people felt connected not only to nature, but to one another, to their ancestors, and to something vast and mysterious that stretched beyond any one life. Belief offered comfort in loss, hope in uncertainty, and courage in the face of the unknown. When sickness struck, rituals gave purpose to care, lending a sense of control when all else failed. When someone was lost, ceremonies and stories provided a path through grief, turning memory into meaning. Faith united the group during hardship and gave structure to the celebration of success. Through shared rituals, people remembered that their struggles and joys were part of something larger, that they belonged to a story older and greater than themselves. Why was as important as asking how. The earliest philosophers and shamans, those who pondered meaning, experimented with trance and song, dared to question what lay beyond the visible, opened new realms of understanding. Some rituals led to unexpected discoveries. A plant's healing power revealed by a ceremonial tasting, or a new way to mark time inspired by watching the stars in contemplation. The imagination set free by faith became a wellspring of innovation, encouraging people to look deeper, to wonder, to dream. Veneration and ceremony gave birth to a sense of community. Shared belief bound people together, creating traditions and holidays that became the glue of the tribe. It was in the hush of prayer and the clamor of celebration that people truly became we, not just a collection of individuals, but a group with a soul, a history, and a vision for the future. Elders and shamans, chosen for their wisdom or vision, became the keepers of the tribe's mysteries, guiding, interpreting signs, and reminding all of the invisible threads that connected earth, sky, and heart. In the end, religion and faith in ancient times were not just responses to fear or ignorance. They were creative answers to the deepest questions of existence, engines for curiosity and wonder, and frameworks for unity and resilience. The search for meaning drove people to invent, to celebrate, to comfort, and to explore both the world and their own spirit. From the first whispered prayers to the earliest temples of stone, faith lit the darkness, kindled hope, and bound the first civilizations together, giving purpose to every dawn and courage to face each unknown night. The pursuit of a mammoth was not a reckless charge into the wild, but the ultimate test of strategy, patience, and human ingenuity. A living proof that our ancestors were masters of calculation and teamwork long before they built cities or wrote down a single word. A mammoth was no ordinary prey. Towering above the hunters, armored in thick hide and armed with sweeping tusks, these giants roamed in herds, their movements unpredictable, their defense formidable. To bring one down meant not only food for weeks, but tools, clothing, and status. Failure, on the other hand, could bring injury, hunger, or disaster for the entire group. The planning began long before the hunt itself. Elders who remembered past attempts gathered the group to choose the best time and place, weighing the risks of ice, weather, and the mammoth's migration. Scouts ventured out, sometimes for days, reading tracks pressed deep in mud, studying broken branches and the pattern of dung, watching the movement of birds and smaller animals that fled before the herds. The ideal site, a narrow valley, a river crossing, a patch of sticky earth, was chosen for its potential to limit the mammoth's escape, turning its size into a disadvantage. Every member of the group had a role, from the youngest runners who acted as lookouts to the strongest hunters who wielded heavy spears tipped with sharpened stone or bone. Those with the keenest eyes planned ambush points, mapping every boulder and thicket for advantage. The most experienced coordinated signals, sometimes whistles, sometimes the wave of a branch, sometimes a single cry, timed to confuse, distract, and funnel the mammoth where they wanted it to go. Cloaks of animal hide disguised the scent and shape of the hunters, while others smeared themselves with mud or ash to blend into the land. The strategy often relied as much on psychology as on strength. Hunters observed the herd's patterns, learning to single out the oldest, weakest, or most isolated animals. With patience honed over years, they approached slowly, letting the wind carry away their scent, waiting for the right moment. At the signal, some hunters would leap into action, shouting, waving torches, creating a wall of noise and chaos, while others lay in wait, blocking the only safe routes out of the trap. The mammoth, startled and disoriented, was driven toward pits dug in secret or narrow gullies lined with sharpened stakes. The chase could last hours, even days. If the mammoth broke free, the group adapted, regrouping to try again or to find another target. No single plan was guaranteed. The key was flexibility and learning from every outcome. Mistakes were discussed, new strategies imagined. The success of the hunt was never the result of brute force alone, but of the ability to predict, to improvise, and to work as one body, guided by trust and clear communication. Once the mammoth was finally brought down, sometimes with a final, coordinated thrust from many spears, sometimes by weakening it over long distances, the work was just beginning. The group moved quickly, knowing that scavengers, rival humans, or even the shifting weather could snatch away their hard-won prize. Meat was cut and dried, bones set aside for tools and shelters, fat rendered for fuel, hides cleaned and stretched. Every part was used, and the story of the hunt became a lesson, a celebration, and a warning passed on to the next generation. The hunt for the mammoth stands as a symbol of what set early humans apart, not just their courage, but their genius for planning, their ability to imagine the outcome before it happened, and their talent for transforming individuals into a true team. Every hunt was a living rehearsal for civilization, requiring memory, innovation, communication, and the willingness to risk everything for the group. In every successful hunt, the seeds of science, leadership, and community were sown. The legend of the mammoth endured, not because it was easy, but because it proved again and again that survival favored not the strongest, but those who could dream, organize, and triumph together over the impossible. The story of fire's domestication is one of the great turning points in human history, a transformation so profound that it changed not only the physical world of ancient people, but also the very way they thought, dreamed, and understood themselves. Yet, from the comfort of the present, it's easy to underestimate the sheer difficulty and audacity of this achievement. To tame fire was not just to strike sparks or keep a blaze alive for a night, but to wrest control of one of nature's most dangerous forces, a force that could destroy in seconds or become a source of warmth, protection, and community for generations. In the beginning, fire was a terrifying mystery. Lightning split the sky and set forests alight. Volcanic eruptions sent rivers of flame across the earth. The glow of wildfire was a signal to flee, not to approach. For early humans, the first encounters with fire were likely filled with awe and fear. But in the ashes of those wild blazes, something new appeared. Warmth in the cold, cooked meat that was softer and tastier, bones cracked open for marrow, landscapes cleared for new growth. Watching from a safe distance, the curious and the brave began to see possibilities. The first step was daring, approaching the embers of a dying wildfire, perhaps snatching a burning branch with a stick or shield of bark, then running it back to the shelter, breath held and eyes wide. Keeping fire alive was a challenge. Early people learned to feed it carefully, to shelter it from rain and wind, to keep embers glowing overnight in a cradle of ash and dry grass. When fire died, the loss was felt as keenly as hunger or thirst. Some groups developed the skill of carrying coals in hollow bones or animal horns, sharing the burden of fire on migrations. Each lesson was taught and retaught: how to lay wood just right, when to blow gently, how to choose stones to build a hearth. But to create fire, to summon it at will, was a revolution. The method, rubbing sticks together, striking flint against stone, coaxing the first curl of smoke and the faintest ember, demanded patience, strength, and above all, relentless curiosity. Every failed attempt was a puzzle to solve. Was the wood too wet? Was the tinder wrong? The moment when a tiny spark finally burst into flame after hours of effort must have felt like magic, a hard-won miracle. Fire changed everything. It offered warmth against the deadly cold, light in the longest night, and safety from prowling predators who feared the flames. Food could be cooked, making it safer, more digestible, and easier to store. Water could be boiled, tools hardened, hides smoked and preserved. The fire became the center of the home and the heart of the group. Around it, people gathered to eat, to heal, to tell stories, and to dream. But fire did more than change bodies. It transformed minds. With control over fire, people could stretch the day beyond sunset, filling the darkness with song, conversation, and imagination. Shadows dancing on cave walls inspired art and storytelling, kindling the first sparks of myth and memory. The discipline needed to keep a fire alive, watching, tending, passing down the rituals, taught responsibility, cooperation, and planning. Even the ability to imagine the future, to believe that tomorrow's fire could be prepared for today, was shaped by this new partnership. Fire also became a symbol, a sign of mastery over the environment, of the power to transform, and of the fragile line between safety and destruction. Its lessons were as much philosophical as practical. Fire could save or destroy. It demanded respect, vigilance, and humility. Those who learned its ways gained a power that lifted them out of pure survival and into the world of creation, invention, and culture. Generations later, fire remains at the heart of our gatherings, our rituals, our memories of home. Its conquest was not an accident, nor a single moment of brilliance, but the result of endless courage, careful observation, and the willingness to try, fail, and try again. In every glowing ember, in every circle of warmth and light, we see the story of humanity's first and greatest friendship, a partnership that shaped not only what we could do, but who we could become. Leadership in the ancient world was not decided by brute strength alone. In the unpredictable struggle of daily survival, the qualities that truly set a leader apart often had less to do with physical power and more with what could not be easily measured: presence, foresight, empathy, and the subtle magic of persuasion. The story of how the first leaders emerged is a story of character tested under pressure, of personalities who shaped the destiny of their groups not by command, but by inspiration, strategy, and understanding. Within each band, there were always the obvious candidates for leadership, those who could hurl a spear the farthest or outlast others in a hunt. But as the challenges facing the group grew more complex, navigating harsh winters, negotiating with rival bands, dividing food during scarcity, or planning dangerous hunts, the community's gaze shifted. It was not always the strongest who were trusted to make decisions when the stakes were highest. Instead, the mantle of leadership often fell to those who could hold the group together with words as well as deeds, who could read the shifting moods of people as carefully as they read animal tracks in the snow. Charisma was a mysterious but unmistakable force. A leader's voice could calm panic in the darkest night or rouse the weary before dawn. Their laughter could cut tension after a quarrel. Their glance could silence bickering or inspire confidence when doubt crept in. But charisma alone was never enough. Real leaders listened more than they spoke. They drew out the quiet, paid attention to the anxious, and balanced the wisdom of the elders against the curiosity of the young. In times of conflict, it was the leader who stepped forward not just to command, but to mediate, to help rivals find common ground, to craft compromises, and to ensure every voice was heard. Cunning and strategy were equally prized. A leader had to anticipate problems, to spot threats before they became disasters, and to outthink both animals and enemies. They knew when to wait, when to act, and how to disguise intentions until the right moment. The best leaders were skilled at using both generosity and tough love, rewarding loyalty and quietly steering those who strayed from the group's shared values. In meetings with outsiders, whether for trade, alliance, or peace, they understood the value of an offered gift, a subtle warning, or a well-timed joke. Diplomacy was as important as daring. In an era where a single quarrel could splinter a group or ignite a feud, a leader's ability to heal wounds and build alliances was vital. They mastered the art of reading faces, sensing when resentment or envy simmered, and diffusing tension before it could erupt. Sometimes they achieved more by listening and waiting than by making grand gestures. Sometimes a quiet word by the fire did more to save a life or a relationship than the bravest deed in the hunt. Most of all, the greatest leaders inspired. They gave the group a vision to rally around. Whether it was a new shelter to build, a distant valley to seek, or simply the promise that spring would return after the longest winter. They embodied resilience, turning every setback into a lesson, and every loss into a story that strengthened the group's resolve. Their presence was a reminder that survival was more than enduring hardship. It was about creating meaning, hope, and purpose from the raw material of daily life. The first leaders were not chosen for their fists, but for the power of their presence, their wit, their heart, and their vision. Their legacy was measured not in trophies, but in the survival and spirit of their people. In every group that thrived, there was someone who could bind individuals into a community, weaving the scattered hopes and fears of many into a single living thread. The qualities they nurtured, empathy, cunning, diplomacy, inspiration, remain at the core of what we value in leadership today. Their stories remind us that the greatest victories are won not just with strength, but with wisdom, courage, and the unyielding will to bring others along into a better future. Modern science has revealed an astonishing truth. In many ways, the so-called cavemen were not just survivors, but masters of mental strategy, innovation, and adaptability. Skills that, despite our technology and comfort, we are still striving to fully understand and reclaim today. For generations, we looked back at ancient people as primitive, as if progress was a straight line leaving their instincts and habits in the dust. Yet as psychologists, neuroscientists, and anthropologists dig deeper, they uncover evidence that many of the secrets to resilience, focus, and even creativity are rooted in the minds and lives of our distant ancestors. Consider the extraordinary awareness demanded by their world. Every moment required the full engagement of mind and body. Their brains had to track subtle changes in weather, the shifting behavior of animals, the cues in a companion's voice or glance, the distant sound of water or a predator's footstep. Recent research shows that such attention, the kind sharpened by necessity and practiced daily, led to memory, pattern recognition, and situational awareness that often rival or even surpass the abilities of modern humans in similar tasks. While our lives are crowded with distractions, theirs were spent refining the skill of focus, of being present, that mindfulness practitioners now seek to recover. Problem solving, too, was not a rare spark, but a daily discipline. Without written instructions or Google, every new challenge was approached as an experiment. What happens if I mix this root with that leaf? If the river is too wide, how can we cross? The willingness to try, fail, and learn, which modern innovation labs try to nurture, was built into the very fabric of ancient life. Modern business thinkers speak of growth mindset and design thinking, strategies that echo the relentless curiosity and resilience that once guided the first inventors of the spear, the net, and the needle. Even social intelligence, that subtle art of reading moods and building trust, was honed to a degree that can seem alien today. Survival depended on close cooperation, instant communication, sometimes wordless, and the ability to navigate rivalry, alliance, empathy, and reconciliation within a small group. Anthropologists now recognize that the emotional intelligence required to keep peace, teach skills, or inspire others was as crucial as physical strength or technical skill. Where a single mistake in social judgment could mean exile or danger, our ancestors learned to observe, adapt, and repair relationships in ways that still form the blueprint for modern teamwork, diplomacy, and leadership. The connection between mind, body, and environment was direct and constant. Their senses were not dulled by artificial light or overstimulation. Their bodies learned through doing, through the feedback of cold, hunger, or success. Neuroscience reveals that the brain develops and retains more plasticity, greater adaptability, when challenged by new environments and forced to learn through action, not just observation. This is why practices like wilderness training, adventure sports, and even mindfulness retreats are prized today for their power to rewild the modern mind, to reconnect us to ways of learning and adapting that were second nature to our ancestors. Their legacy is also visible in our rituals, our need for community, our impulse to mark special moments with story, song, and symbol, the urge to gather, to celebrate, to find meaning in challenge and comfort in shared memory is a direct inheritance. And the tools they developed for emotional resilience, storytelling, ritual, laughter, communal problem solving, remain at the heart of therapy, education, and innovation today. Perhaps the most profound lesson we continue to learn is humility. The first humans thrived, not by dominating the world with force, but by listening to it, adapting to its changes, and finding strength in cooperation and creativity. As we face the unpredictable challenges of our own age, climate change, information overload, rapid transformation, we're rediscovering the value of ancient skills, adaptability, presence, curiosity, empathy, and the courage to learn from failure. In the quiet depths of our brains, and in the stories and strategies we still use, the wisdom of the so-called cavemen lives on. Far from primitive, their lives were laboratories of learning, and their example reminds us that the answers to many of today's questions are not just ahead of us, but also behind us, in the minds, hearts, and ingenious hands of those who first learned what it truly means to be human. The greatest mystery of the ancient world may not be the lost bones of mammoths or the vanished markings of old fires, but the true nature of the minds that shaped them. What was it, really, that set those first people apart, not merely as clever animals, but as the originators of everything we now call human. Modern science can measure their tools, map their migrations, and even reconstruct fragments of their lives. But the secret of their intelligence still flickers just beyond the reach of fact, alive in the shadows of memory and imagination. It is tempting to see their lives as simple, their thoughts as primitive, a reflection more of our own biases than of their reality. But the deeper we look, the clearer it becomes that their minds were not only sharp, but profoundly complex. The ancient brain was shaped by a world that demanded constant learning and unbroken attention, a landscape that was both a puzzle and a playground for the curious and the bold. Survival depended on more than memory or logic. It required the ability to notice patterns in chaos, to improvise new solutions where none existed, to teach, to inspire, and to hold entire encyclopedias of knowledge in the heart. Their intelligence was ecological, rooted in their direct relationship with every stone, plant, animal, and season. They mastered the art of reading the land, of decoding the calls of birds or the tracks of prey, of weaving memory into story, ritual, and tool. But their genius was not just in adaptation, it was in imagination. They saw possibility where others saw randomness, creating meaning and beauty in the harshest conditions, turning fear into myth, hunger into ritual, and isolation into community. The first symbols, the first laughter, the first acts of kindness and grief, each was a leap beyond the present moment, proof of minds able to reach across time and into the lives of others. What made them truly unique was not any one invention or act, but the collective spark that lit within the group. Their wisdom was communal, their knowledge alive in voices and gestures, in teaching and in play. They were both practical and poetic, patient engineers of shelter and tool, but also dreamers who painted the walls of darkness with hope and wonder. They questioned not only how to survive, but why, to whom they belonged, what the stars meant, where lost souls might travel, what legacy might remain after the embers died. Recent discoveries in neuroscience suggest that the architecture of their brains was, in its essentials, as sophisticated as ours. What has changed is not the capacity for intelligence, but the ways we use it. Where they used every sense, every day, we rely on layers of technology and abstraction. Where they trusted memory, story, and intuition, we turn to written word and algorithm. Their genius was in integration. Mind, body, emotion, and world fused in a seamless flow. This realization should humble us, not separate us. It means the roots of science, art, empathy, and innovation stretch back far deeper than we once believed. The same fire that burns in a child's curiosity or an artist's imagination today is the echo of an ancient, restless mind, forever seeking, learning, adapting. Understanding the true depth of their intelligence does not diminish our own. It expands it, inviting us to recognize ourselves not as a break from the past, but as a living continuation of its mystery. In this, perhaps, is the real legacy of the ancient mind. The reminder that intelligence is not just problem-solving or calculation, but the courage to wonder, the gift of empathy, the need for meaning, and the unbreakable desire to create and connect. Their true genius was the ability to turn the raw material of existence, fear and hope, loss and love, into something enduring, something more than survival, the very foundation of what it means to be human.